By way of introduction, my name is Grant Guttschow. I'm a Senior Director of Product Management and the General Manager of our state and local government applications at C3AI. So that includes a variety of different applications, which some of you may already be familiar with, but I'm going to talk through them very briefly, getting into our newest set of applications here today. So for law enforcement, in the top left corner, that is our single pane of glass into criminal investigative data sources. Think records and jail management systems, license plate readers, body-worn camera footage, etc. And that provides that collaborative experience across different jurisdictions, which may not have otherwise had an easy way to share data between the two of them. For property appraisal, one of our most popular applications today, it does exactly what the name implies and tells you what a property is worth. Gives you robust evidence packages and tools for machine learning involving real property. Generative AI, if you were in our last session just a few minutes ago, you saw a lot of examples of the natural language power of querying for constituent services, for parents and teachers, for school districts. So being able to navigate your complex data sources, both structured and unstructured, in a very simple fashion. And finally, government IQ is where I'm going to spend the rest of my time today talking about. And this is something that is brand new. We're announcing it for the first time this week publicly. It's not on our website yet. You haven't seen it in news articles. So this is a very exciting time for myself, and I hope for you. And we're going to talk through how we think about this. But if I had to sum it up very simply, it's that over the last year or so of working in different types of R&D engagements and proof of concepts and pilots with customers, we've noticed a trend in something that is extremely tedious, extremely time-consuming, and I'd like a show of hands if you feel the same: paperwork. Is paperwork tedious? Is paperwork time-consuming? And that paperwork could originate from a lot of different sources, and we're going to talk a lot about that today. So within each of these suites that we had that I just showed, law enforcement, property appraisal, generative AI, and now government IQ, there are sub-applications within those. So if you were in the last session with Turcare, generative AI can encompass generative AI for government programs, generative AI for constituent services, law enforcement. If you're a law enforcement customer, it might be law enforcement for sheriff's offices, it might be law enforcement for incarceration facilities or redaction, things like that. But government IQ, we really split into two unique applications called audio IQ and document IQ. And we try to keep the names as simple as possible with this stuff. And first I want to talk about audio IQ and the findings we've had in these applications, some interesting facts that we've found through the work over the last few years. And this is not to sell you on these applications. This is really just my time to share things we've learned, to answer your questions about the technology, and to give you some insights about what other government agencies might be doing around you. We owe a lot of our thanks to specifically Riverside County, who afforded us the opportunity to do these as proofs of concept for Department of Public Social Services, for their recordings office, and so you might see some references to some of those screenshots that we've developed for Riverside County. So with Audio IQ, one of the most interesting things that we've found over the years here is that audio specifically is one of the most underutilized government data sources, and it's got a wealth of insights. You know, I personally took a tour of the LAPD 911 center. There are hundreds of people working, thousands of calls coming in. Do you know how many calls they save and transcribe and make searchable? 0. Of all the 911 calls calling in, they're saving them. They are MP3 files on a server, but they're not transcribing them. They're not doing anything with them, right? And that's just one example in the Justice and Public Safety Division of where audio with this immense value is coming in, and they're not doing anything with it necessarily, right? So that's really painstaking. I'll pick on San Mateo County for a second. We talked about their jail phone call system, right? It's called IC Communications, which they save the jail phone calls coming in and out. But there's a lot of intelligence, criminal intelligence, and investigative leads that might exist in those phone calls that would be made available to, if you transcribe and start searching across them. So across each of these categories, right, health and human services, public works, administration, education, there is probably some type of audio data source that is just kind of sitting there waiting to be utilized. And that's what we found after many, many engagements across all these different verticals. So when I say that, we offer machine learning and generative AI capabilities on top of this data source, the concept of audio intelligence and workflow integrated impacts is what I'm really going to harp on today throughout this session. So this session was called Government Insights to Impacts, right? How do you take the knowledge that you already possess in your data in some way, shape, or form and turn that into something that makes a difference towards your constituent satisfaction, towards your bottom line, towards your improvement of your government services writ large? So one of the most common sources of audio, right, if I think about call centers, right, and audio could come from videos, like I said, body-worn camera footage, interrogation rooms, courtrooms, things like that, but it primarily comes from call centers. And so call centers is one of the places where your mind instantly goes when you think about audio and media, and coincidentally, it's also one of the biggest problems in many government agencies. And when you sum up the problems into 3 unique categories, the first, 30% average annual employee turnover. There is a lot of new employees coming in, which means there are a lot of untrained employees at any given time. So where do you start? How do you ensure that every call has the same level of professionalism and constituent satisfaction when there's so much employee turnover, right? So giving them resources for that. Hold times are a big problem pretty much everywhere there's a call center, and it's one of the most commonly evaluated metrics in terms of a successful call center. Because who likes being on hold? Nobody, right? Whether it's for 30 seconds or 30 minutes, you just don't like it. And you never know kind of where you are in the queue in most cases. And finally, an interesting statistic we found is that, and this is not just true for government call centers, but all call centers in the industry, is a 60% customer churn after a single poor experience, right? And I can personally attest to this because I was a Delta loyalist, a Delta Airlines loyalist. I had a bad flight, I had a bad customer service experience, and I said, I'm going to United. That's it, and ever since, been to United. And so this is something where I hope many of you can relate to it. And now what I want to do is actually jump ahead and show you the demonstration. Normally you see these demonstrations and it's at the very end of the presentation. I'm going to insert it right in the middle. So keep you guys awake, get you guys to happy hour. So when we think about audio IQ for government contact centers, and this could be for a contact center specifically, it could also be for any one of your audio data sources, what we want to do is improve call and media engagements with artificial intelligence, with generative AI, with agentic AI that we're talking a lot about this week, into your employee workflows. So I'll play this demo. It's only about 2 minutes, but I'll talk through kind of what you're seeing. And the first thing you're seeing, like many of our applications, is a dashboard, right? What are my key performance indicators that I care about in my call center organization? Well, do I care about agent utilization rate? Do I care about first call resolution or call sentiment? And like many of our C3 applications, this can be configured towards whatever data you're dealing with, right? Whatever metrics you'd like to see, we can publish that on your dashboard. And for any specific call, you can search for that call ID and get a call detail page. And within the call detail page, you're starting to see all of the information populated: call summaries, call sentiments, related calls. And very importantly to note, this is not from some database of call history. This is directly from the audio files that we've been able to build an application around a single media data source, right? And within that, there's a lot of forms that need to be populated. There has to be state-mandated reports, organizational reporting. So you can do all of that within the actual application, as well as view the transcript, listen to the audio, see the call details for yourself, validate the form population as well, right? So across all of this call detail page, I've got the information I need to make decisions, to complete my job, to export paperwork, which reduces the ultimate hold times. And what I can also do is click into caller detail pages. So this is Emily James's detail page, who's called in several times to, in this case, a public social services use case. Synthetic data, but very realistic representation of what you might want to see. And within James's detail page, you can see all of her historical information. How many times has she called? What has she talked about? And again, the beauty here is it's not just a representation of a data set, of a database or a structured table. This is all coming from media that was otherwise unused, right? Just MP3 files that you can build a full application workflow around, search across caller names, search across call keywords, so you can start to find the insights that previously would have had one of your employees sitting there listening to calls all day long to find out the insights that they're looking for. So that was a very quick demonstration of the Audio IQ workflow. Very simple pages, dashboards, call details, caller details, but coming from a single data source. And so when we talk about machine learning orchestration or multi-agent orchestration, this is something that C3 AI has a patent for, so we were really first movers in the market. And that's what makes this so special and so unique and so interesting to me, is because when you think about what did you just see in that workflow, it was multiple different machine learning models working together to provide a very simple user experience. So the first step on the left-hand side, receive contact center data, upload the MP3s, connect to the call center system, etc. And then you're gonna have to transcribe it, right? You can't get away from the transcription step because you have to turn it into text. And we'll talk more about why that's so difficult, easier said than done. But once you get that transcription and all the metadata extracted, you can then explode your world into all these different machine learning categories, summarizing and extracting fields, matching related call history, measuring performance of those calls or sentiment, and then you're always validating that human in the loop, whether it's for a form that needs to be filled out, whether it's for keywords or red flags that you're looking to highlight, and it always ends in documentation. Every single one of our experiences, it ends in paperwork. It's the government, it's life. I was in the military, I was a Marine Corps officer, so much paperwork, more paperwork than shooting by a long ride. Yeah. So this is what we talk about when we think about the multi-agent orchestration. And what's so interesting about this is when we say multi-agent orchestration, you think, okay, fine, there's 3 machine learning models, right? But what makes the C3 platform powerful is the 3 machine learning models that you see kind of in the middle here from 3 different vendors. We used an OpenAI Whisper model for transcription, so from an OpenAI vendor. Then we used an Anthropic Claude model for extracting forms and summarizing. Then we used a Gemini model from Google for actually creating that documentation and exporting formatted reports. So 3 different models from 3 different vendors that if you were to build it yourself, it would end up in spaghetti code, right? But when you build it on the C3 platform, you can keep things organized, and if next week OpenAI provides the world's best models for everything, you can swap out the Anthropic and the Google models with all OpenAI models, right? With a couple lines of code, it's super quick and easy. So that's what's so powerful about the C3 platform. And one of the other interesting things we found as we were doing this work is that when you just transcribe, it's not really gonna work out like you think it will. And that's okay if you're watching Netflix, right? If you're watching Netflix and the actors say, what is your address? And the response is 393 Doolittle Road in Temecula 9591. That is technically an accurate transcription. Those are words that would have been said, and you can kind of sound it out yourself. But if you feed it into a large language model rather than just a pure transcription model, you can then say, convert this to an address. Make sure it's formatted like an address. And these are real prompts that we generated into a system. 393 Doolittle Road, Macula 9591, which still isn't quite there. So you add a third set of logic, a third prompt that says, assume this address is in Riverside County. This is, again, a real use case that we worked on from the Department of Public Social Services. And it finally spits out 393 Doolittle Road, Temecula, California, 92591, which is the correct answer, right? But it took multiple steps of orchestration to get there. And a human really wouldn't know to ask for that. So we're doing this at scale for every transcript, for every MP3 file. So providing that context for the multi-agent orchestration really enriches the data and makes it more valuable, less hallucinations, less problems in the outputs, and that all comes from very intuitive orchestration throughout all of the transcripts that exist. Right? So if I had to sum up the entire Audio IQ pitch, it's that traditionally, when you're talking to a contact center employee, especially in government, they are distracted. They're taking notes, they're filling out paperwork, they're doing forms. Versus with an Audio IQ product like this, you can have the conversation, you can focus on the constituent, and then all of the paperwork, the documentation, the metrics will be taken care of for you. And ultimately what that does is it shortens hold times, it improves employee morale. It gets you ahead of the problem so you can be proactive rather than just reactively do paperwork all day, right? And so these are the metrics that we had worked through with Riverside. This was something that was very near and dear to my heart. with my background as a sexual assault prevention and response advocate. This was the Department of Public Social Services, specifically Children's Services Division, which handles tens of thousands of cases of child abuse and neglect every single year. So this is some of the most sensitive information, the most sensitive calls. Over 60,000 calls every single year, over 30,000 referrals received, whether it's from mandated reporters like teachers. And so what we were able to accomplish in 3 months was to deploy some of this application, to transcribe some of the calls, to complete the documentation. And the core metrics for success, they were dealing with a 13-minute average caller hold time, a 56-minute maximum caller hold time. And the reason that's such an important metric to track is because if you imagine someone's waiting on the phone for 56 minutes waiting to talk about their case of child abuse and neglect, that's probably a pretty important problem. Right? So that's why you don't just want to track average hold times, you also need to consider the maximum. So these were the results. Our accuracy results specifically, we measured across 3 different categories. Number 1, transcription. So we had a 94% transcription accuracy, which if you're curious about how we get these numbers, it basically said, a human reading a transcript, like you saw the Doolittle Road one, that would be an incorrect transcription. So 94% of all of the lines of text were correct, transcribed how a human would expect. We had a 92% summarization accuracy, which basically categorized the allegation for children's services. And then finally, the response evaluation accuracy, which is to say how much time does the Children's Services Division have to respond to the allegation. Is it 24-hour response time based on severity? Is it 4-day, 8-day, et cetera? So this is something where accuracy is always going to be something we measure, and how we improve this further through several reasons, through several opportunities. You can enrich the data, you can optimize the hardware or software, add more GPUs and do more calculations in line, or you can fine-tune the models specific to those customer requirements. So like I said, we used 3 different models for the use case. We could have tested 20 different models and seen how that performs as well. But you also want to keep things simple and intuitive. And finally, what we did with all this, coming back to the paperwork, these were the sets of documentation that are required to be filled out for all 30,000 of those cases that I mentioned earlier. On the left-hand side is an organizational set of documentation. So something that the Riverside Department of Public Social Services put together to basically take the notes of the incident, take the notes of the call, and we were able to completely automate that process. So this is actually AI generated, even though it looks exactly like they would have exported it from their own systems. And then on the right-hand side is a state-mandated piece of documentation, the SDM hotline, or the Structured Decision-Making Matrix hotline tool, so that you can automate. It's a multi-step kind of workflow-driven document about response times and Children's Services Division specifically. So when I say that it kind of always ends in documentation, this is what I mean, is that there has to be reporting, there has to be paperwork or forms, or whether it's organizational level, state level, back to your constituents, et cetera. And that's, regarding Audio IQ. That was the end of my demonstration. Going into Document IQ next, but I want to pause there, give you just a few minutes to ask any questions that you have about Audio IQ before we jump into Document IQ. And if we can, if you want, maybe I can repeat your question as well.
Yeah, so I have several questions. Does the Audio IQ have several ways to track individual agent performance?
Yeah, exactly. So the question was, can we track individual agent performance? So in the same way that we can segment by constituent or by caller, we can also segment by receiver. And that's actually easier to do because typically if you're a receiver, you're answering from the same phone every time. So that metadata that comes through in the audio also indicates the receiver and their performance.
I have another question. Does the Audio IQ app, does it have a way to show you where your peaks are, where your slow seasons are, that way to really graph for that for the call center, or?
Yeah, exactly. So the question was, is there a way to kind of aggregate metrics and show peaks of call volumes and call centers? And the answer is yes. When you look at a dashboard in a C3 application, typically you're looking at an aggregate set of information across all calls. Where are our high volumes? Is it Monday at 4 p.m.? Is it Saturday at 9 p.m.? So you can see all of these metrics aggregated and visualized at a whole agency level down to a specific call level.
I have
One more question.
Is there a way to dynamically shift workload and let's say if the demand's here,
So the question is, can we shift agent workloads based on kind of call performance? And the answer to that one is no. So you caught me. We can't do everything. You know, where we fit, and this is true for many of our C3 applications, is we are not the call routers. We are not the voice responder system that routes based on hold times and callers and pending sets. So we don't do that, right? And in this case with Riverside, we started our process when the call got hung up, right? So we were not there while the call was happening, like telling, we're not a robot on the call, right? This is after the call gets hung up, it gets sent out as an MP3, we grab that as soon as we can, and then we start our process and building an application around it. Yeah, thank you for the question, Chris.
So Grant, from a technology architecture perspective, how does this layer into the call center technology stack?
Yeah, good question. So many call centers are built on kind of antiquated traditional technologies. So Cisco, big call center provider, and what they do is literally just what I said. It's route calls. As you call into a single number, it feeds it to like 6 different handsets, right? That's what Cisco does, and they do it super good, right? We don't do that. We are taking place after the call has been recorded, after the call has been engaged with. You're starting to see more of the technology come around for kind of real-time AI chats. You know, if you have the OpenAI app, there's a really cool voice module on it. But doing that in real time with real data, talking to a real person while doing paperwork, it slows down everything, and we're not quite there yet. So I would say it layers on top of your IVR, it layers on top of your call recording system. In the case of jail phone calls, it would be kind of outside or on top of the collection of all of the inmate back and forths. So some people have tablets for these in jails, some people have literal payphones. So it would really layer on top of all the data collection points. All right, I'll keep going. If you think of more questions about audio, we'll give an opportunity for you to ask at the end as well. But I want to talk about the paperwork. And just like audio, I think documentation is not an underutilized data source, but it's an under-optimized data source. So it is synonymous across government and really any industry with tedious creation and review processes. This is something where Turkara in the previous session talked a lot about the emails, how tedious it is to create emails, how tedious it is to keep all your paperwork up to date. And the same is true across every single record. So this is not the same graphic that you saw earlier. These are different kind of documentation pieces across the same 4 categories. Public Records Act requests, huge in law enforcement, really tedious. Freedom of Information Act requests, search warrant generation. We started some work on suspicious activity reports, child welfare case reports. Over on the public works side, building code compliance, permitting, right? These are all really complicated sets of documentation that typically in government, you are just brute forcing it, manually reviewing it. You have 50 employees there to just check for the stamps and the legibility, right? And that's not scalable. And when you think about the research that we've done on this, is large cities experience up to 40% paperwork rejection rates. And interestingly enough, small cities have about a 10% paperwork rejection rate. So it scales with the size of the city. And I believe the reason, I don't know this for sure, this is me guessing, don't quote me on this, I know we're recording, but here we go. I believe this is because the larger the city is, the more complicated the paperwork is, the harder stuff is to find, the more complex the condo renovation board has to be. So when you think about large cities, it is harder to find information, there's a lot more of it, and the rules and regulations are just more complex inherently because when you're thinking about building codes, for example, there's restaurants underneath condos, underneath businesses, and that just really doesn't scale when you're dealing with people renovating their bathrooms, for example. And the rejections typically result in over 11% cost increases. So 40% paperwork rejection, that's bad. Cost increases, well, that's what you really care about, right? How do we improve the bottom line of our organizations and make these types of software innovations accessible and affordable? So again, I'm going to show a quick demonstration right in the middle of this section, keep you guys awake. When we think about Document IQ for government, it's improving the generation and processing of forms, so the pass-fail plus the generation or redaction of forms integrated again directly into your employee workflow. So again, a 2-minute demonstration. It's going to be very fast. But what this shows is actually the work that Sohaib mentioned before we're doing for New Jersey Economic Development Authority. And they're dealing with millions of dollars in grants and disbursements and invoice processing that people, again, are just brute forcing and saying approve, deny, approve, deny, approve, deny. It doesn't scale well. So this provides them, first off, a dashboard at an aggregate level to see what are we actually measuring. What is the frequency of ingest? Where are the locations that we're giving grants to? What's the total amount remaining of the grant allocation? In this case, it's for a child care facility improvement program. And then you've got a grantee list. So I just saw a dashboard. Now I'm looking at a grantee list where it's all the pending work, essentially. And this just helps me organize my workflow. Again, it's not super complicated, like AI in-your-face workflows. This is just about organizing the work you have to do. And then this, so far, you haven't seen any artificial intelligence yet. And the next screen I'm going to click on is where it's really happening. So this, again, is just about the burn down per organization of the grant funding for the child care facilities. And with the invoice, this is where the artificial intelligence comes in. This is where the recommendation of a pass or a fail from a submitted invoice for disbursement exists. So we recommend to fail this invoice because it's missing, in this case, a contractor and facility signature. The date doesn't reflect it. It actually appears to just be a random receipt that wasn't related to the program. And we give you the checklist. We give you the source citations of our decisions or our recommendations to say, this passed, this failed, this passed. And that is what keeps the human in the loop to either agree and fail or override and pass. So in this case, I'm going to click Confirm Failed Invoice. I can actually see the exact text that will be inserted into an email and sent back to the constituent. And this kind of incorporates, again, back into what Turkair was talking about with constituent services, our ability to generate emails, to generate communication, and then send it out for processing. So that's the end of the demonstration. Very quick and easy, but something that might save 10 minutes, 20 minutes per document, which adds up over the months, over the years, to save millions of dollars for these types of organizations. So how are we doing this? What's happening behind the scenes? It's, again, a workflow-driven integration. And on the left-hand side, this is really the novel approach here, is if you go back 5 years ago and you wanted to build an invoice, passer, and failer, right? Some type of AI to pass and fail an invoice. What you would have had to do 5 years ago is basically upload 10,000 pass invoices and 10,000 fail invoices. And you would train the model to recognize what is a pass, what is a fail. And that just doesn't scale. Right? I can't do this when there's a variety of different document types coming, an infinite amount of invoices happening. So what we did, and this is a very novel approach here for Document IQ, is in addition to connecting to the database or user upload system, their CRM, their submission portal for their invoicing, on the bottom left corner, we are indexing state and agency rules or guidelines. What do I mean by that? It means that you might have, in the case of Riverside, a 100-page California Notary Public Handbook, which is how to be a notary, right? How to sign things, how to stamp things, what's a good stamp, what's a bad stamp. And so there's hundreds of pages of text out here about how to do your job as a notary, as a disbursement officer. So rather than try to teach an AI model with all these examples of good and bad outcomes, we are teaching an AI model in the same way you would teach a new employee to do their job, by feeding in all of the documentation, all of the guidebooks, and then automatically generating AI logic. And I'll give you an example of that on the next slide. And then we score and generate information. So you're ultimately slapping together the documents and the rule books, and the generative AI or the agentic AI is then making a recommendation and telling you, we think this is a fail, and here's why. Here's the rule book citations that we expected to see. They're not in there. And then you can keep that human in the loop. Rather than passing things every 10 minutes, you're passing things every 10 seconds. It speeds up the process, and then you're completing documentation quicker. So this is an example of what we were able to accomplish, again, in partnership with Riverside, California, is we worked on their recordings documentation. And this is something where there is 1,000+ pages of manuals about how to do recordings, and there are hundreds of different document types. So we ingested the Notary Public Handbook, like I said, internal administrative guidebooks from the Assessor Clerk Recorder, the Recorder's Document Reference and Indexing Manual, the DRIM, which we've learned a lot about. I never thought I'd know so much about notary stamps in my life. But then once we did that, we were able to segment by document type. So we did 6 of the high-frequency document types for deeds of trust, for reconveyance, for substitution of trustee. And there's like over 100 different document types that might be submitted to the recorder. But what we picked these 6 document types because it would really make an impact when you start with a small subset. You know, we've heard of the 80-20 rule. You know, 20% of the tasks take up 80% of the work. And then ultimately what that ended with, so 1,000 pages, 6 different document types, it ended with 432 unique documentation rules. So rules that were identified by the generative AI model based on the documentation and then applied to each of these documents. And this accelerates the scale out. It accelerates the learning and training and time to value, ultimately, of these document decision making. And so these are some of the examples of the rules. We segmented the rules, those 432 rules, into human understood categories. So when the actual recordings are done, they are themselves splitting into recording rules and fee calculation and quality control and indexing rules. So you can assess for, is the legal description correct? Is the property description correct? Is it SB2 housing fee exempt? Is it a grayscale or is it a colorful document? So all of these decisions have to get made, have to get checked for each document. And what we're able to show is during user acceptance testing, just recently we were down in Riverside, it really indicated high accuracy, over 91%, in analyzing recordings and identifying failures while avoiding false positives. And this is a really important topic to talk about when you think about the accuracy scoring of these document IQ applications, and that's what we're going to talk about here for a second. So when we think about the reduction of false positives, I mean that we as a company have decided to err on the side of caution. Why do we do that? Well, there are true positives and true negatives and false positives and false negatives. If the document is marked pass, for example, but a human wouldn't agree, that would be an example of a false positive. And that's the one that we really want to avoid. Why do we want to avoid that? Is because that might cause improper recording or disbursement. You might make an action that impacts outside of the system, right? So once you do that, you can't really take it back, right? Versus if the document is marked fail, but a human wouldn't agree, it might cause a confused constituent, for example. And this is true at scale. One is indicated by precision, one is indicated by recall, and this is how we think about measuring the accuracy of these systems, especially around documentation, is that we are continuously evaluating the precision and continuously evaluating the recall. And if there's ever a conflict between those, right, we're erring on the side of precision because we don't want to do something that we can't take back. And that's going to be true for any document we deal with, whether it's an invoice, whether it's a recording, whether it's a permit, for example. And so what does this look like in practice? So I've got like 2 more slides here. And what does it look like in practice? It is such a fine line. So these are examples of notary stamps that true positives, we both agreed that these, in the top left corner, these notary stamps were good. It's a pass. In the bottom left corner, true negatives, we both agreed that they were a fail. And when we say we, I mean the model and the subject matter expert. But if you start to look at this and you start to consume this, the false positive and false negative, it is such a fine line. It could be one character that's blurry that made the difference between a human and an algorithm, an expert and an algorithm, right? So if you just kind of sit here and consume this, right, how do you get better if it is such a fine line? Ultimately, what it comes down to is the algorithm can't do everything, right? We have to have administrative alignment to result in improved accuracy. We have to agree at scale what a good notary stamp looks like or what a good invoice is. If we can't agree, then the model accuracy is never going to get better, right? So this is just an example that we will never be 100%. I will never tell you we're going to be at 100% accuracy because this, right, is a level of subjectivity that will always be there. And that's okay, right? That you don't have to have 100% accuracy to provide immense efficiency gains in your organization. And the last slide I'll leave you with, when you think about the governance of these models and the administrative alignment, if you were here last year at Transform, my entire breakout session was around this graphic and around what does responsible software development mean? Privacy and security, bias and fairness, robustness, transparency and governance. So this is what I spent 45 minutes talking about last year. I've got a whole presentation on that too. If you're interested in going deeper on what these mean and how we think about this as a company, I'm happy to show that to you offline as well. So with that, I would love to open up the floor for questions. This is my email. If you scan this QR code, you can give us some feedback about the session, anything you'd like me to reach out to. If you'd like a copy of the presentation, feel free to scan this, and I can send you the copy of the presentation, and then you just have my email, and you can bug me all day long. Any questions? Yes, sir.
On the example that you gave about the audio file and incorrectly or determining the correct address, okay, was that via a prompt or was that done automatically?
Both. Right, so we had automatically prepared the prompts to look for this and then fix it automatically.
Okay.
So it is through prompt engineering.
So I presume that is computer, because what if I just want the transcription to be verbatim of what was there?
So, sorry I didn't repeat the question the first time. So it was around the transcription of an address, and the follow-on question was around if we'd like it to be verbatim. And I would argue that if it's spelled wrong and it's not correct, then it probably isn't verbatim. You know, the ending address was what the intent of the conversation was. So when you saw the kind of partial address spelled out, that's because they were speaking in a not clear enough manner that it kind of just came out funky through the transcription algorithm. So it wasn't that we renamed the address, that was what the user actually meant, and a human listening to it might have picked that up, but it was a bit slurred, it was a bit unclear, and so we cleaned it up in line. I don't know if I convinced you, but we can talk after too.
We will.
Great. Great, wonderful. Any other questions that we can answer around audio IQ or document IQ or just, you know, what's for dinner? I don't have that answer. Yes, sir.
How about, as one of the rules, redaction? Can you talk about redaction?
Yeah, so a good question. The question is around redaction. And this is something where, especially for law enforcement agencies, public safety agencies, redaction is one of the most high-frequency manual documentation tasks where you have to export a case or a criminal incident, and you have to clear out all the PII and HIPAA information and financial transaction information, and there's different categories you have to redact. So as part of Document IQ, as an extension of our law enforcement application, we can kind of merge these two concepts together and be able to export automatically redacted PDFs. And if you're interested in seeing a demonstration of that, we've actually got it in our marketplace kiosk for state and local. So we've got the law enforcement demo playing on a loop, and you can actually see the automatic redaction work there. Same thing for property appraisal. If you're interested in a property appraisal demo, we'll be doing it on the main stage tomorrow. You can also come by the marketplace for a personal demo. Great. All right, I'll stick around for a few minutes after this, but thank you so much for your time. You're out 5 minutes early, so rush to happy hour.